Hello everyone, thank you for watching the 8th and final video in the Explaining Revelation series. In this video we're going to discuss what the Bible says about the 7 vials of Revelation and where we are in Revelation's prophecies today. If you haven't already, please click the like and subscribe buttons so that others can learn about the true interpretation of the book of Revelation. If you haven't watched the other videos in this series that precede this one, I do recommend that you do so first. The 7 vials. So the 7 vials are found in Revelation chapters 15 and 16. They immediately follow the 7 trumpets, which if you already watched that video, you know that the 7th trumpet was the Protestant Reformation. So we're looking for events that follow the Protestant Reformation in the timeline of history. So the first vial is described as a noisome and grievous sore. So God essentially is telling the angels to go out and pour their 7 vials upon the earth in verse 1. In verse 2 it says, "And the first went and poured out his vial upon the earth, and there fell a noisome and grievous sore upon the men which had the mark of the beast, and upon them which worshipped his image." So we know that the mark of the beast is figurative. It's not a literal mark that's placed on the forehead or the right hand. Basically, this is the opposing mark to God's seal, which is placed on his followers in Revelation chapter 7. So what we're looking for here are those who are following the Antichrist, because they are the ones that are marked with this figurative seal. So the first 3 vials represent events around the French Revolution. The Enlightenment, or the Age of Reason as it was called, elevated science and reason over faith, which caused atheism to spread throughout France. France was known as the oldest daughter of the church, meaning of the Catholic Church. It was a very Catholic country at the time, but after the death of Louis XIV, the Age of Reason began, and it started around the year 1715. So the spread of atheism throughout France allowed the revolutionaries' rage to be poured out upon Catholicism. It took a little while before the French Revolution began, but it was the Age of Reason and the spread of atheism which actually set the stage for the French Revolution, which targeted Catholicism very directly. So the rise of atheism in France is the first vial, beginning in 1715. Now with the second vial, we start to see that the vials mirror the trumpets very closely. So the second trumpet, if you recall, was the Vandals. They were represented by a mountain that was thrown into the sea because they migrated from the Carpathian Mountains when Revelation was written all the way to Carthage, and then became a seafaring people that raided the coastal cities of the Roman Empire. So vial 2 is very similar to that in that the second angel poured out his vial upon the sea, and it became as the blood of a dead man, and every living soul died in the sea. So the vial, just like the trumpet that preceded it, targets the sea. This vial represents the French overseas and naval defeats. So in 1791, the most important colony that France had was Saint-Domingue, which was ravaged by a slave revolt. That's modern-day Haiti. There was a slave revolt that basically cost them that territory. In 1793, the siege of Toulon left roughly half of the French navy in ruins. The islands of Dominica, St. Lucia, and Tobago were ceded to Britain in 1794. In 1795, the British won another naval victory over the French at the Battle of Groix. And then 1798, the British defeated the French in the Battle of the Nile. And then in 1805, they defeated them again in the Battle of Trafalgar, another naval victory. So there were a lot of naval losses that the French had during this era of the French Revolution into the Napoleonic years. With the third vial, we again see that the vial mirrors the corresponding trumpet. So if you recall from the third trumpet, it targeted the rivers of Roman Gaul, which is modern France, and that represented Attila the Hun, who targeted a lot of the cities along the rivers in Roman Gaul. In this vial, we see that the third angel poured out his vial upon the rivers and fountains of waters, and they became blood. And I heard the angel of the waters say, Thou art righteous, O Lord, which art and wast and shall be, because thou hast judged thus. For they have shed the blood of saints and prophets, and thou hast given them blood to drink, for they are worthy. So once again, we are seeing that this vial targets the Catholic Church, Catholic France, because Catholicism has been martyring Christians, persecuting Christians for centuries at this point. And that's what this angel is referring to in verse 6, for they have shed the blood of saints and prophets. Now, this vial targets the rural areas of France. So the French Revolution is leaving the cities, it's spreading to the rural areas where the rivers and fountains of waters are, just like Attila the Hun targeted those same areas along the rivers in modern France. So the Vendée region of northwest France suffered about 175,000 executions. These people that were executed were the Catholics that the revolutionaries believed were not supporting the French Revolution because they were supporting Catholicism over the Age of Reason. Thousands of men, women, and children suspected of supporting the Catholic monarchy were executed by drowning in the Loire River. So this actually took place between 1793 and 1794. There were people that were actually forced drowned because they were believed to be Catholic. Vial number 4. The sun scorches men with fire. So if you recall, the fourth trumpet was the fall of the Roman Empire, and it talked a lot about the sun, the moon, and the stars. Well, the same thing occurs here. It talks about the sun. So it says, And the fourth angel poured out his vial upon the sun, and power was given unto him to scorch men with fire. And men were scorched with great heat, and blasphemed the name of God, which hath the power over these plagues, and they repented not to give him glory. So this vial uses the pronoun him when describing the sun. So there are other vials that use pronouns, but they're not actually describing people. They actually use pronouns such as it, for example, as opposed to him. So this suggests that the sun is representing a man. In the book of Revelation, heat and fire represent war. We've seen this with the trumpets. The first 3 of them all talk about fire. So this is again a military leader. In 1796, Napoleon Bonaparte was given command of France's Army of Italy. His Montagnat campaign against the Catholic Sardinian and Habsburg armies was such a success that the Sardinians actually withdrew completely from the war only 2 weeks later. So vial number 4 represents Napoleon becoming a general in 1796. Vial number 5. The seat of the Antichrist is darkened. So this passage says, And the fifth angel poured out his vial upon the seat of the beast, and his kingdom was full of darkness. And they gnawed their tongues for pain, and blasphemed the God of heaven because of their pains and their sores, and repented not of their deeds. So this is targeting the seat of the Antichrist. Obviously, we know that the Antichrist is the Pope. His seat is in Rome. So after a French general was assassinated in Rome in December of 1797, Napoleon ordered the French army to march on Rome. France's general Louis-André Berthier entered Rome and demanded that Pope Pius VI relinquish his temporal power, his political power that he held, that allowed him to persecute Christians. So when he refused, Berthier deposed him on February 20th of 1798. So this event marks the deposition of Pope Pius VI in 1798, when he actually lost the papacy, he lost temporal power, and he was exiled to France. Vial number 6. So this is actually the vial where we are today. So this says, And the sixth angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. And I saw three unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, Satan, and out of the mouth of the beast, the Pope, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, which is the Jesuit superior general. For they are the spirits of devils, working miracles, which go forth unto the kings of the earth and the whole world, to gather them to battle of the great day of God Almighty. Behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watcheth, and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked, and they see his shame. And he gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. So we see a lot of different things here. We see that this vial is targeting the Euphrates, just like the sixth trumpet did. It dries up the Euphrates, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. So that's the first piece. The second piece is the three unclean spirits like frogs, which gather the whole world together for battle. And then the third piece of evidence for this vial is the Battle of Armageddon. So the drying up of the Euphrates, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. This actually represents something that's very similar to the sixth trumpet. If you recall, in the sixth trumpet, the Byzantine Empire, which was headquartered in Constantinople, was conquered by the Ottomans. So this vial actually represents the Ottomans, who were conquered with their capital in Istanbul in 1918. So during the beginning of World War I, the Ottoman Empire held the entire Euphrates, as you see there on the left side of the map. The entire Euphrates was controlled by the Ottoman Empire before the war started. After the war, the Ottoman Empire collapsed, and that paved the way for all of these new modern nations. They didn't all come to power immediately after World War I. However, the way of the kings of the East was prepared. These different countries had their way prepared because the Ottoman Empire collapsed, and the French, the British, they took over this territory temporarily until these new modern nations came into power. Three unclean spirits like frogs, which go forth unto the kings of the whole world to gather them to battle. So this represents three different world wars. So the first world war, you see the map here. Most of the nations and territories of the world were involved in the war. The Second World War, even more territory was involved. And currently, because of the different alliances that exist in the world today, we are set up for World War III. If you look at this map, this is NATO. So all of these countries have a defense alliance where if one of them is attacked, all the rest have to go to that country's defense. So we are set up for about 31 different countries to go to war together if any of them are attacked again, which would cause a third world war. And then lastly, we have the Battle of Armageddon. So in the year 1918, at the very end of World War I, there was actually a battle called the Battle of Megiddo. So if you look at this map here, the British were pushing their way up from Egypt through modern Israel on their way to Syria and Turkey, and the Ottoman Empire was on the run. So the British were pushing their way up, and all these different towns that you see here are where fighting occurred, and right in the middle is Megiddo. So the General Allenby, the general who was in charge of the British Army at the time, named this battle the Battle of Megiddo. It literally has the same name because that's where Armageddon comes from. It stands for Mount Megiddo. So he named it after the Battle of Armageddon, which fulfilled that prophecy. So Vial 6 represents three world wars, the Battle of Megiddo, and the fall of the Ottoman Empire. So we are still waiting for the Third World War, which would bring Vial 6 to a close. So the seventh vial is the final prophetic event described in Revelation before the second coming. In this vial, we see that there is a great earthquake, so another major religious event, such as was not since men were upon the earth, so mighty an earthquake and so great. So, this is going to be the greatest, most consequential religious event in history. And the great city was divided into three parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And great Babylon came in remembrance before God, to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. So, what we're seeing here is that during the seventh vial, Rome will be destroyed, the cities of the nations will be destroyed along with it. Rome is described as being divided into three parts, and the Catholic Church, Great Babylon, came in remembrance before God to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. So this is God's final judgment upon Catholicism. So there's other additional evidence for the seventh vial in Revelation chapter 18, which talks about the destruction of the Whore of Babylon. And in verse 8, it says, "Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire." So this destruction is going to involve burning, death, mourning, and it's going to cause a famine as well. In the next verse, it describes John seeing the smoke of her burning, and that the kings of the earth, so political leaders, are going to mourn her destruction. They're going to mourn her while standing afar off for fear of her torment, saying, "Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour thy judgment is come." Then in verse 21, we see that a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and cast it into the sea, saying, "Thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all." So this is a complete destruction of the city of Rome. So like I said, this will be the greatest earthquake, the greatest religious event in history. God is taking his vengeance on Rome and on the Catholic Church. "With violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all." So Rome is completely leveled. It'll be as if it never existed, which suggests a nuclear attack. Obviously, if we are waiting for World War III to close out the sixth vial, then nuclear powers are going to be involved in that war, and there really is no other logical conclusion to the war besides a nuclear attack. "Utterly burned with fire" and "smoke of her burning," those two phrases suggest that the entire city is burning. The great city was divided into three parts, so that phrase could mean either just a full destruction, or it could be a reference to three types of destruction, like in Ezekiel 5:2. So when Babylon conquered Jerusalem, there were three different types of destruction that were mentioned in that verse: fire, sword, and exile. So in this case, the three types of destruction would be nuclear explosion, the fire, radiation poisoning, which if you're not killed by the initial blast and you're close enough, you would die from radiation poisoning, or starvation from nuclear winter. The cities of the nations fell, so other cities are destroyed along with Rome. I mentioned when we were discussing the sixth vial that the NATO alliance would drag 31 countries into a war together. So if Rome is involved and Italy is a NATO nation, then the other NATO nations would be involved as well, and their cities would also be destroyed. Death and mourning and famine. So famine is a reference to the nuclear winter. When there is a nuclear war, all the soot would go into the atmosphere, it would block out the sun and cause a drastic drop in temperatures and sunlight. So plants would not be able to grow, and that would lead to a famine that would kill a significant portion of the people, especially in the northern hemisphere. "For in 1 hour is thy judgment come." So if this 1 hour follows the same day-year principle as the rest of Revelation, that would mean 15 calendar days. So that could mean that the war starts as a conventional war, and then Rome is destroyed on day 15. So Vial 7 is the destruction of Rome and the cities of the nations sometime in the future. additional evidence for the seventh vial. So there are other prophecies in both the Old and New Testament that are describing the environment immediately preceding the second coming of Jesus Christ that sound a lot like a nuclear winter. Isaiah 59 verse 10 says, "We grope for the wall like the blind, and we grope as if we had no eyes. We stumble at noonday as in the night. We are in desolate places as dead men." So clearly Isaiah is saying even in the middle of the day, it's as dark as night and we can't see. So we're stumbling around, we're trying to hold on to the walls so that we'll be able to, guide our steps essentially. And we are in desolate places as dead men. So after a nuclear war, many of the cities and areas around the world will be desolate. Zephaniah, chapter 1, verse 14 and 18. A day of wrath, a day of trouble and distress, a day of wasteness and desolation, a day of darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness. They shall walk like blind men, because they have sinned against the Lord, and their blood shall be poured out as dust, and their flesh as the dung. So clearly after a nuclear war, during a nuclear winter when there's famine, a day of trouble and distress, a day of wasteness and desolation, a day of darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness, all of those phrases would describe a nuclear winter when you can't see in the middle of the day. He reiterates what Isaiah said, "They shall walk like blind men because they have sinned against the Lord." And then also, if you are close enough to be victimized by the initial blasts of a nuclear war, your blood would be poured out as dust. You're essentially vaporized. Zechariah chapter 13, verse 8. "In all the land, saith the Lord, 2 parts therein shall be cut off and die, but the third shall be left therein." So if you recall the phrase "the third part" when we were talking about the trumpets meant a third of the world's population. Well, the same thing applies here. 2 parts shall be cut off and die. So 2 parts, 2/3 of the world's population will die. So in a nuclear winter type environment, the northern hemisphere, where most of the nuclear powers are located, is where the soot would be, and that's where the sun would be blocked the most. So the majority of the death would occur in the northern hemisphere. It would be a little bit more likely that you would survive in the southern hemisphere, where there will be more plant life that would still be able to grow. But this is saying that 2 parts therein shall be cut off and die. In a major nuclear war, which would involve Europe, America, Russia, China, that would take about 2 years. If China stays out of the war, then it would probably take about 3 years, according to studies, for 2/3 of the world's population to die. But that's important to note that 2/3 of the world's population die right before the second coming. In the same prophecy, but the next chapter, Zechariah says that the light shall not be clear nor dark. And then after this, Jesus returns and clears the sky, makes it bright again, and makes the plant life grow and everything during the millennium reign. But before he returns, the light shall not be clear nor dark. And then Peter, in 2 Peter chapter 3, said, "The heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. The heavens being on fire shall be dissolved, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat." So the heavens are on fire. The heavens are passing away with great noise. The elements shall be burned with fervent heat. So think about that. The nuclear blast would be about 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than the surface of the sun. So anything in its path would be melted. And he's saying that the heavens themselves will be on fire. If you were living in the first century and you saw a nuclear explosion in a vision, that's probably how you would describe it. It would look like the heavens were on fire. The millennium reign and beyond. So after Jesus returns, After all the suffering that takes place during the seventh vial, he throws the Antichrist into hell. He throws a false prophet into hell. He binds up Satan for 1,000 years, and he reigns on earth during the millennium. So after the seventh vial, the city of Jerusalem is going to be under attack. The city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and half the city shall go forth into captivity, according to Zechariah 14. So this is that same prophecy that's covered in Zechariah 13 and into 14 that talks about 2/3 of the population of the world dying, and then Jesus returns to save the city of Jerusalem and stop all of the death from the nuclear winter. Lukewarm Christians and Jews will return to God. So this is described in several different prophecies. Jeremiah 31, Zechariah 12, Zechariah 13, Hosea 5. They all talk about the Jews returning to God in their time of trouble, of distress. Now, there was no word for Christians at the time, so it's probably more likely that the lukewarm Christians are the ones returning to God. So the Laodicean church age that we're in today, which was described as lukewarm, where we're focused on, living our best life, personal gratification, as opposed to sharing God's word with others. These lukewarm Christians of today are going to be returning to God because of the stress that they are under during the suffering of the seventh vial. Jesus then returns to save Jerusalem from the attack that it's under. You see that's described in several different passages. The second coming also brings the age of grace to an end. The age of grace is the age between Jesus' crucifixion and his second coming. So at that point, once he returns, salvation is no longer attainable. Once you see Jesus has returned, it's very easy to have faith in Jesus Christ as the Son of God at that point, once you actually see him for yourself. So the age of grace ends when Jesus returns because you can no longer actually attain salvation. Salvation is through faith in God. The Antichrist and false prophet, so the Pope and the Jesuit Superior General, will be cast into hell alive, according to Revelation 19, verses 20 and 21. Satan is then bound in the bottomless pit, and Jesus will rule the earth for the millennium. The millennium reign. So during the millennium, Jesus will resurrect the Christian martyrs, and they will reign with him for the 1,000 years in Jerusalem. So that's called the first resurrection. It's described in Revelation 20, verses 4 through 6. But that will occur immediately after Jesus returns and saves Jerusalem. Christians from all nations will flow into Jerusalem to live with Jesus, and the nations of the world will no longer fight against each other. In fact, as these Christians are migrating to Jerusalem, the Bible says that 10 men will grab a hold of Christians' clothes as they travel to Jerusalem, saying, "We will go with you, for we have heard that God is with you." So this is because the age of grace has ended and salvation is no longer attainable, that these non-Christians are going to be begging the true Christians to take them with them to Jerusalem. God will establish a new covenant with Christians during the millennium. Holiness will abound, and animals will even live in harmony. So not only will the nations of the world no longer war with each other, but animals actually are no longer going to prey on each other. After the millennium. So after the millennium reign, Satan is released from the bottomless pit. He wasn't in hell, he was in the bottomless pit. So he is released at this point, and he goes unto all the nations and gathers them together for battle against Jesus and against the Christians. Satan is obviously defeated at this point, and he's cast into hell. And then the second resurrection occurs. So anyone who was not resurrected during the first resurrection, because they were not a Christian martyr, is resurrected, and Judgment Day takes place. God then creates a new heaven, a new earth, and a new Jerusalem, and those who qualify for eternal life in heaven then live with him for eternity. Hosea's 3-day prophecy is a very fascinating prophecy. It's found in the end of chapter 5 and the beginning of chapter 6 of Hosea. And he's actually talking about Jesus and the second coming here. So a lot of people have made prophecies about the timing of the second coming and when Jesus would return. All of them have been wrong so far. I haven't really seen anybody talk too much about Hosea's prophecy here, which seems to indicate when Jesus will return. So in the 3-day prophecy, Hosea writes, "For I will be unto Ephraim as a lion, and as a young lion to the house of Judah." So the lion of the house of Judah is Jesus. "I, even I, will tear and go away. I will take away, and none shall rescue him. I will go and return to my place till they acknowledge their offense and seek my face. In their affliction they will seek me early. Come, and let us return unto the Lord, for he hath torn, and he will heal us. He hath smitten, and he will bind us up. After 2 days will he revive us. In the 3rd day he will raise us up, and we shall live in his sight." So this is saying that Jesus will go and return to his place until his followers acknowledge their offense and seek his face. So the lukewarm Christians return to Jesus in their affliction. So in a time of suffering, they will seek Jesus. After 2 days, he will revive us. And in the 3rd day, he will raise us up, and we shall live in his sight. So this is describing, in chapter 6, verse 2, the first resurrection. So in the 3rd day, he will raise us up, and we shall live in his sight. So if the first resurrection occurs at the beginning of the millennium reign, that means that day 3 is 1,000 years, because we shall live in his sight during those 1,000 years. The martyrs will live with Jesus in Jerusalem. So if day 3 is 1,000 years, that means the first 2 days are 1,000 years as well. So here we see that the Lion of the tribe of Judah goes to his place for 2 days. He then returns from his place and raises us up, and we live in his sight for the 3rd day. So if the 3rd day is the millennium reign, that means that the first 2 days are also 1,000 years. Now we know that the most likely year of Jesus' ascension to heaven, his crucifixion, his resurrection, and his ascension, was 30 AD. So that means that the first day would end in 1030 AD, and the second day would theoretically end in 2030 AD. Now, will it be exactly that year? We don't know, but Hosea seems to indicate that the second coming will occur sometime around 2030. At that point, Jesus' second coming occurs, Satan is bound in the bottomless pit, the first resurrection occurs, and the millennium begins. And then in 3030, theoretically, the 1,000 years ends, and Satan is freed from the bottomless pit, he's defeated in battle, and he's cast into hell. Again, this is just a theory, it's not a prediction, but it does seem to indicate that the second coming is very close upon us. So thank you for watching. If you want to know more about the book of Revelation, please consider reading my book. It's available on Amazon. It's called Explaining Revelation. And if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. Thank you very much.